Welcome back to the Hidden Truth Show. I'm very excited to present this interview of someone I've admired for a very long time, David Horowitz. I read his autobiography, Radical Son, many years ago and loved it. In the book, he describes being raised in New York City in the 40s and 50s in a neighborhood filled with proud communists, including his own parents. After receiving his master's degree from Berkeley in the 60s, he got very involved with radical leftist groups in Oakland. He worked closely with the Black Panthers and was the editor of the New Left's Ramparts magazine. However, around 1980, he had a complete political conversion and has since been one of the nation's most active critics of the left's movement. Now 81, Horowitz is still churning out books and speaking more frankly than ever about the Marxist threat here in America. It sounds crazy to be talking about Marxism in America in 2020. It failed miserably in the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, Venezuela, and everywhere else it was tried. But younger generations of Americans are ignorant of this history, and their utopian concept of communism still sounds appealing. Of course, the activists of today, for the most part, do not call it Marxism or communism. Instead, they call it progressivism, social justice, economic justice, and democratic socialism. But it all comes down to the same thing: a large, powerful, centralized government which tries to impose equality of wealth across a population. Implementing this requires huge government powers and size. With that, inevitably comes massive corruption, which is one of the reasons it always fails. It also fails because it destroys individual freedom and individual incentive to take a risk, work hard, and succeed. America was founded on principles of individual freedom and small, local, and limited government. But younger generations have not been properly taught the history of our founding and what makes our system of government so great. No one understands the new leftist radicals better than David Horowitz. He talks about it in his latest book, Blitz: How Trump Will Smash the Left and Win, already a New York Times bestseller. Before we get to the interview, a reminder, you can become a member of the Hidden Truth Show by going to Patreon. Just click on the link. It's in your podcast app, and it's also in the YouTube description. You can support the show for just $5 a month. Become a member of the Hidden Truth Show and get special content. You will also get extra content from this David Horowitz interview. He and I kept talking casually for another 10 or 15 minutes after the interview, and we're going to go ahead and put that up for Patreon members only. Go to Hidden Truth Show, pay $5 a month, support independent media. It's more important than ever, especially as we see the censorship going on in social media and even in mainstream media. Support the Hidden Truth Show, just $5 a month. Okay, here we go with our interview with David Horowitz. Well, you started by kind of comparing what's going on today to what you were involved in the 60s, and that's actually where I wanted to start. Sure. Because I was born in 67, so I didn't experience that, and I'm seeing what's happening today. And it seems to me to be kind of similar to what I heard happened in the 60s. So how would you compare what you were involved with, which was the Black Panthers and some, radical Marxist movements, to what we're seeing today?
Well, the Panthers were a violent street gang that was lionized by the left because they were violent, but also because they were Black. I was not a violent type person. I never threw a rock in the 60s. And one of my epiphanies came when I was standing with Tom Hayden, a malicious fellow who I knew fairly well, at People's Park, which was this plot of land that the university owned and was going to build dormitories on. And of course, the left was always a communist movement. These left-wing leftists occupied that. It was a big spot of land, and they actually built a pretty nice park on it, and they called it People's Park. And one day the university decided it was time to build the dorms, and the police came. And when the tear gas started flying, and that's why I hate when people, none of these demonstrations are peaceful that we're seeing in the country today. Because if you're really a peaceful demonstrator, you don't allow yourself to be used by violent people. You don't form a front, it's a human shield for them, which is what these other demonstrators are doing. You denounce them. When Martin Luther King had his civil rights demonstrations, they didn't have anything to do with anybody that didn't swear by nonviolence. There was no looting of stores. There was no attacks on police. They wore suits, not ninja outfits, and they didn't come armed. Anyway, I was standing there with Hayden, and I saw how violent, and I expressed my concern about the violence. I thought, actually, one person was killed. I was just worried about it. And Hayden sort of put his arm around me, so to speak, and said, David, you have to understand, what we have to do is lure middle-class kids into situations where they're going to get their heads cracked, and that will radicalize them. I was horrified by that, which showed that I didn't really belong in the left, because that's what Hayden did. That's what he did at the Democrat convention in '68, which is why the Democrat Party today is a communist party. Its agendas are communist, its philosophy is communist, and it's a racist party as well.
What's interesting is that was happening so soon after Martin Luther King and his message of nonviolence and peaceful protest. So how was it that so soon after his passing that there was this violent...
He was assassinated, and there were riots over that. And, violence begets violence. And it's one of the reasons that Martin Luther King was wisely against using violence.
But the justification was because violence was used against him, even though he advocated for nonviolence, that's what gave them the justification.
Yeah, Eldridge Cleaver went out to assassinate police right after the assassination. And he did. He shot a cop who still has, if he's alive, still has the bullet fragments in his face.
Now, didn't Black Panthers believe in black superiority?
Well, black racism is something you're not allowed to talk about. I mean, we live in a very censorious culture now. It's what I call a proto-totalitarian society that we're in. Hate crimes. 47 states have hate crime legislation now. Hate crime is a thought crime. If you kill somebody, that's a crime. Whatever their motives. Usually somebody who will kill another human being is deranged in some way. So what does it matter what the motives were? But if you criminalize an attitude, an opinion, an idea, you not only violate the First Amendment, but you set up all the legal foundation of a police state. The next step is hate speech, which we're going to outlaw. So since people think that disagreement with them over, for example, black racism, I think black racism is a much bigger problem today in America than white racism. There's no white racists. I mean, David Duke holds a march. They had 15 people and 1,000 counter-demonstrators. Louis Farrakhan, who's a raving lunatic, Jew-hating, white-hating, Iran, terrorist-embracing demagogue, he called for a 1 million-man march, and he got probably 800,000 people to march in Washington. The one There are two good things I have to say about John Lewis. One is that he was very brave when he was young. And the other is that he refused to participate in the Farrakhan March because Farrakhan was a racist.
You mentioned David Duke, but what about the Boogaloo Boys that we're hearing about?
Yeah, well, name me one. Give me a name. The fact of the matter is the Ku Klux Klan at its heyday had 4 million members, 11 members of the Senate, and I forget, but something like 70 members of the House. Today, there's not 4 million, there's 3,000 Ku Kluxers. Their organizations are bankrupt and they can't really show their face in public. So we're beyond white racism and so-called white supremacy. These are ludicrous. White supremacy.
Is there any doubt to you that the Boogaloo Boys are just a straw man that's being put out there?
No, that's what they are.
Have you done?
Influence. I could name you 20 black racists who have national prominence. I can't name you one Boogaloo boy.
Has your organization looked into them at all?
My organization doesn't do research like that. We're geared up to defend the country.
No, they're supposed to wear Hawaiian shirts, but I've yet to see a Hawaiian shirt. Look,
it's sort of ridiculous. I mean, Antifa, look what they've done. I mean, they've staged, we're now in 2 months where they've torched 400 cities, put Portland under siege, destroyed New York. I mean, they have clout.
So help us distinguish.
We got into this. I forget exactly what we were discussing. Oh, about the Panthers. I didn't think the Panthers were racists. They certainly made me feel important, which was explained to me by a Black Panther friend, said that Huey Newton's talent was a pimp talent. He knew how to play people, and he certainly knew how to play me. But when they murdered my friend, I woke up. And you see that happening today. I forget where it was, but I think it was in Seattle. Some radio talk show host was describing the Seattle riots as peaceful protests until they burned his apartment house.
Right.
That's not a good way to learn. And I learned the hard way, that the people I was among were bad people.
So how would you compare the ideology of the Black Panthers to Black Lives Matter?
Well, pretty much the same. Black Lives Matter was created by 3 pro-Castro communists. The difference is when I was introduced to Huey Newton by Hollywood producer Bert Schneider, who made 5 Easy Pieces and Easy Rider. He took me up to Huey's penthouse. Huey had just come back from China and was all full of praise for the Chinese. And I knew they were really bad people, the Chinese communists, and said so. And Bert Schneider, who was their sponsor and in a way mine, was really mad at me and said, I thought Huey was going to hit you when I said that. But Newton was like smarter than that. I don't think that you could get along with the leaders of Black Lives Matter if you said that their embrace of Hamas terrorists and Jew haters in the Gaza and the West Bank, was an alliance with terrorists who were basically Nazis. I don't think you would. I stayed useful to Huey for a while after that. Maybe a year. I raised a lot of money for them and always had access to them.
But they were, the Black Panthers, their ideology was Marxist?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, again, it would be Marxist-Leninist. And I said to Huey that Lenin was full of crap. And, he played me. What can I say?
Put to bed.
The gangster. I described this in Radical Sun, this scene where, there was a black superintendent of Oakland schools. I had raised a lot of money. We bought a church and turned it into a learning center. And I thought we could make millions off the government. And Huey, I think he was trying to warn me. He had a decent side. So he turned up his phonograph because he thought he was bugged by the FBI. And he told me this, recalled this scene from the movie Dillinger, where John Dillinger can escape. He gets to the Mexican border. And then he says to, I guess to his girlfriend, he says, if I go to Mexico, I'll be a free man. But here I'm worshiped by young kids come up. They want my autograph. And so he turned around and went back. And Huey said to me, David, he said, I always swore that if I wasn't going to be a revolutionary, I would be a bank robber. He was a criminal. The Black Panther Party was a criminal party. In that sense, it's similar. These are criminals, what we have in the streets today. But the difference is the Democrat Party is behind them. I mean, what's really frightening is that the whole Democratic Party has been taken into the communist camp. And I use that word advisedly. You know, I grew up among communists. My parents were communists. The Green New Deal, in my book, Blitz, I have a chapter on the Green New Deal. It's called Green Communism. Just, for example, one of the platforms in the Green New Deal that nobody talks about is the plan to confiscate or eliminate all gasoline-driven cars within a 10-year period. So I looked it up on the internet. There's 276 million gasoline-driven cars in America. It has to be done within a 10-year period. Of course, the planet disappears. So a car is a big ticket item for a middle class family, and it's also something Americans are very attached to because it's freedom. You get up in your car and you go wherever you want to go. So how are you going to eliminate 276 million cars in a 10-year period? You can't do it without instituting a police state. And that's what they intend. And how do I know that? Because when you ask them, how are you going to finance this $100 trillion Green New Deal? How are you going to implement it? And all of them, whether it's Cortez, who made the formal announcement, or Cory Booker, they say, well, we had a war, we'll do it the same way we did with the wartime mobilization during World War II. So we're going to have martial law. And they overlooked the fact, I guess, that Franklin Roosevelt, the liberal president, incarcerated 120,000 Japanese Americans for national security reasons. Well, if you're saving the planet, and they say that saving the planet is more important than defeating Nazism, that'll justify anything. Anything. So, anyway.
Is that the biggest difference, perhaps, between late 60s radicals and today? Is that today the Democratic Party has basically embraced the whole ideology?
Of course. As I said, Tom Hayden organized a riot at the Democrat convention in '68 to defeat Hubert Humphrey, who was 95% liberal, but he was an anti-communist, and he supported the Vietnam War. That's why they wanted to get rid of him. I would say, to answer your question, maybe this has been a little long, but they took the worst of the 60s. White skin privilege, a ludicrous concept. If there's skin privilege in America, it belongs to 5 designated peoples of color, and blacks in particular. If you have black skin, you can get into Harvard with 200 less SAT points than why. In fact, they're probably abolishing the SAT by now. You get jobs. Alan Carolla became a comedian because he had to wait 6 years for a fireman's job. And when he finally sort of got there, it was a black woman who had just been hired, and he said, how long do you have to wait? And she said, I have to wait at all. This is so un-American, this white skin privilege crap.
Yeah. Well, and white skin and based on gender also. I have a similar story.
Gender, yes.
I have a brother-in-law who did recruiting for the Navy, and he said that if a woman walked in the door, they fill out the application for her, essentially.
Oh, we got a vice president slot open. It has to be black. The Democrat Party is a racist party in the purest sense of the word. Identity politics is racism. And they also control every inner city in America of size, every killing field.
It's racist, and it's also, at this point, socialist. There was pushback.
They're communists. Socialism used to be something like Sweden, where 20% of the economy was socialist. Sweden was always a capitalist country. Same thing with Denmark. But they were mild. They used socialism because it sounds moderate and mild. These are communists. If they took power, if they win the next election and they start consolidating their power, people will go to jail. There'll be a gulag here. And I never finished my foundations of totalitarianism. But if there's a concept like hate crime as opposed to a crime, and hate speech, that will justify suppressing and shutting up and declaring an enemy anybody who you deem is hateful. Not easily. That will include everybody I know. It will include everybody on the right. Anytime you disagree with a Democrat, you're a racist. That's the way they argue. So I think we're in very serious trouble.
So you would say we're far further along down that track.
But look, I was the editor of the largest magazine of the New Left. And I would have, if you asked me what I was in 1972, I would have said, or 71, I would have said I'm a Marxist revolutionary. But I wrote an article in Ramparts condemning the Weather Underground, who are responsible for the concept white skin privilege and for the concept of having a war at home. These people in the streets are at war with America. And Republicans and conservatives, they still don't get it. They say, the Democrat Party is playing politics. Nancy Pelosi has accused the president of treason. That's not politics, that's war. We're in a war. And the only reason there aren't armies out there is the federal government is too powerful. You couldn't survive with a formal army in the streets. But we're the closest thing to that.
So Herbert Hoover, running the FBI, said that the Black Panthers was the greatest threat to the internal security of the country at the time, and the FBI went after the Black Panthers, right?
Yeah, well, they shut down the COINTELPRO program. I forget when, but Huey was a criminal. He killed a lot of people. The Panthers, by my estimate, killed more than a dozen people. Now, I knew people in the Panthers. I knew people who fled California, Panthers, when Huey returned from Cuba because they were afraid of being murdered by him. This was a very violent group of people.
Well, I mentioned that to liken it to today, where you've got federal involvement in Portland now in Seattle. What role do you think?
Oh, yeah, but they're under siege by the Democrat Party, which was pretend. I was watching the hearings today with Barr, and every Democrat is claiming these are peaceful protests where they're burning the courthouse. They set the city on fire. They're, hurling missiles at the police. There have been well over 1,000, maybe close to 2,000 officers injured by these people. What I don't understand is why the feds don't just declare a curfew in Portland, arrive at midnight and arrest everybody who shows up and ship them to Guantanamo and keep them there for 5 to 10 years till they sober up.
Well, the reason that those legislators are saying that these are peaceful protests is that they're watching CNN and MSNBC,
Oh, yeah,
which all they do is talk about how peaceful they are, and they don't show the violence. I mean, it's literally two different worlds.
That's true. We have a completely corrupt media. But look, Democrats lie every time they move their lips these days. Just watching them. The congressional hearings are supposed to be inquiries. It's supposed to be that they were set up for lawmakers to ask questions of officials so they can make proper laws. This was a prosecution. Every Democrat that got up would have their set of, what I call fabricated positions. They were rude beyond belief to Barr, who was very proper, and the Republicans were all proper. Bullied him, didn't let him get a word in edgewise, wouldn't let him answer questions. It was absurd.
So you support the federal government getting involved. What you see with Antifa and Black Lives Matter.
I support the military getting involved at this point. One of the things that disturbed me greatly was when some members of the Joint Chiefs attacked Trump for saying he would bring the troops in to protect the White House was under siege. That peaceful crowd had burned a church. They did a lot of other things. There's nobody in his right mind who doesn't think that if the Secret Service and the federal agents hadn't been there, they wouldn't have climbed the White House fence and burned the White House. Why were they attacking the White House in the first place? Every one of these cities where there's allegedly systemic racism in the police departments is 100% controlled by the Democrat Party. Why aren't they demonstrating at DNC headquarters? Because this is a seditious, revolutionary movement. Trust me, these people have no respect for America, for its laws, for its system of government. And unfortunately, today they have the full support of the Democrat Party in their treason.
So walk us through this revolution. What is the path in their minds? Where are they going? And how do they plan to get there?
Leftists never know where they're going. The Black Lives Matter, what they want to destroy the nuclear family. Biden wants to abolish deportations, detentions, open the borders, give welfare to anybody who comes across, which could be 100 billion South Americans, to get American welfare benefits. They would, double or triple their incomes if they did, get free health care. The difference between left and right is a different view of human nature. People on the left think the problem is society is the problem, patriarchies are the problem, races are the problem. No, the problem is us. The problem is human beings. If human beings have what do you call it? They cheat, they lie, they steal, they rob, they kill. What struck me as most fascinating was that when they took off the police shows, which are just documentaries that show what the police have to deal with, all the scumbags out there, unbelievably cruel, vicious people. That's what the problem is. That's why we need government, and that's why we need laws. When they declare an autonomous zone in Seattle, these people have no idea of how to make a society work. And it's something I used to say when I just left the left. Leftists spent their whole mental time in this world dreaming up ways to destroy the system, undermine it, and destroy it. They don't spend 1 second in a day on how to make a society work, given the problems that human beings present. That's the difference. So that okay, we'll abolish the police. Now, anybody in his right mind knows that is going to be a devastating blow against poor, Black people in the inner cities who are the victims of these violent crimes. You have these Congress people, again, at these hearings saying, 34% of the prisoners, or whatever it is, it's probably a lot more, but 34% are Black. And Blacks are only 13% of the problem. Yeah, but they commit 50% of the violent crimes. That's why they're in jail. You let them, and who are their victims? Other Blacks. 95% of their victims are Blacks. The Democrat Party is the worst nightmare for Black people.
You mentioned the destruction of the nuclear family, which is right there on the front page of the Black Lives Matter website. Help us understand where they're going with that. Why is that one of their objectives?
The reason we have a democracy is because we put limits on government, and we try to strengthen what's sometimes called the private sector, independent, free assemblages of people. The greatest obstacles to left-wing schemes, communist schemes, are religion and the family. These are independent centers of authority. That's why they hate homeschooling, because it robs them of the power to indoctrinate innocent young people who don't have the resources to confront their lies when they're inflicted on them. The religious right was non-existent until Roe v. Wade, when the left thought nothing of taking 9 lawyers on the Supreme Court and changing the fundamental attitudes towards life in this country overnight for every community without exception. That's what created the religious right. All the big religious right organizations, the Moral Majority, Family Research Council, I think Focus on the Family as well, were created within 3 or 4 years of Roe v. Wade. First thing they did was elect Reagan, and the next thing they did was elect Donald Trump. That's why they hate family. It gets in their way. They want control.
Are these people true Marxists in the sense that they're reading Karl Marx's teachings?
No, when Billy Ayers, who was a terrorist and an empty-headed moron, but I think his title is the Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Education, and is responsible for atrocious books like Teaching Social Justice and Arithmetic. When he was made elected vice president of SDS, in his acceptance speech, he boasted that he hadn't read a book in a year. I was horrified. I read too many books. Obviously, that's why I'm no longer in the left. My experience is most leftists, well, they've probably read the Communist Manifesto because it's required readings for all undergraduates in all universities these days. But that's it. They don't know anything. If they did, they wouldn't have to shut down the opposition. Why have they purged conservatives from universities? Because they can't meet their arguments. They don't have any arguments. They just have name calling. And watch these congressmen today at the hearings, at the bar hearings. I lost this thought a while ago. I think it was Hakeem Jeffries, or maybe it was a guy named Richmond, who was saying 34% of the prison population is Black, but Blacks are only 13% of the population. Yeah, but they commit 50% of the violent crimes. That's why they're in jail. And nobody talks about the Black crime rate. You can't talk about crime wave. Nobody talks about Black racism, which is virulent. Louis Farrakhan has been embraced by the Black caucus.
No, I got
what if David were embraced by something called the White caucus? What would we think?
I got called a racist for suggesting that the biggest issue in the black community is the absence of black fathers as opposed to police brutality.
Of course. There's no evidence. Obviously, there's going to be cops that shouldn't be cops. Like, you can't have a perfect, any institution has got bad apples. There is no systemic racism in America. There's no systemic brutality against blacks. All the statistics show quite the opposite. 2/3 of black criminals shot by police are shot by black police. 2/3. 2/3 of whites who are shot by whites, and 2/3 of Hispanics who are shot by Hispanic police. It stands to reason that white police officers would be very nervous about using excessive force. This guy Chauvin, you get an incident like that, which is, horrifying to watch. But if you think about it, first of all, they've charged 4 officers with murder of George Floyd without an investigation. We don't even, we have no idea what their intentions were or whether it's a murder or an accident. I know that will shock some people who are used to listening to lynch mobs and convicting people before the trial. Of the 4 officers charged with murdering Floyd, one is an African American, another is an Asian American. How does race factor into that? What is Chauvin, the guy with the knee on his neck, what's his motive? We don't have any idea because they didn't bother to have an investigation as normal because the lynch mob said, hang him. I could go on and on about this, but it's insanity.
You would say for this movement.
Because he resisted arrest. You don't see that on the famous video, but you see it on the other video. It's a big guy. He resisted arrest. He was high on large quantities of fentanyl, which suppress your breathing capacity. He just had COVID, which suppress your breathing capacity. He had congestive heart failure, heart disease. The knee on the neck, it's frowned on in most police departments, but it happens that in Minneapolis, which is 100% Democrat leftists, 100%, it has a black police chief, which used to have a Democrat Party police union. The police have finally realized who their enemies are.
Yeah, but instead it's all Trump's fault.
Of course it's Trump's fault.
But it is, I'm sure you agree that it's really brilliant of their side to use this alleged racism and systemic racism as a way of discrediting America, the whole founding of America.
I look at them, like I say, when I was the editor of the largest magazine of the left, I would shoo people like this out of my office because I had such contempt for them. And that's when I was a Marxist. Such contempt for their understanding of things. So I wouldn't call it brilliant because they've been saying there's systemic racism now for 50 years.
But hold on a second. When I say brilliant, we've got Major League Baseball, the NFL, Bank of America, Apple, all of them.
YouTube. I get propagandized by YouTube every day about, poor black people.
And it's such a great slogan, Black Lives Matter, because people want to inherently, because people are naturally good, they want to believe in this. And so they've gotten this huge support using that as their headline.
Well, say Black lives don't matter, but they kill you if you say all lives matter. They actually killed a 24-year-old white mother, for saying all lives matter. These are evil but evil people.
Okay, but isn't it brilliant, though, what they're doing by using that to...
No, it's stupid on the part of the rest of us.
Yes.
We accept this crap. Show me the systemic... Look, in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlaws institutional racism and systemic racism. Show me the lawsuits because of systemic racism. There are none. Why? Because there are no liberal courts? No, because there's no systemic racism.
Here's a text that I sent to some friends of mine, and they gave me LOLs back just to give you an idea. And these are smart business people. I said, Black Lives Matter does not care about black people. It is a Marxist revolutionary group using manufactured systemic racism as the grounds to take down our institutions in America.
Yeah, they're terrorists too.
What I just said is 100% correct, right?
Absolutely.
But I'm telling you, intelligent people. I live in Los Angeles. These are business people in Los Angeles running companies, and they're laughing at me.
And there are probably some Jews among them who don't notice that these people are supporting Hamas.
But how does
the agenda is to exterminate the Jews?
How do we communicate to each other in this day of divided media? I mean, are you appearing on any outlets that?
I'm not invited. No, I haven't been. I can't remember how many years ago was the last time a liberal host interviewed me. The only flack I've gotten has been from a conservative who couldn't handle the fact that I said that George Floyd, would be alive today if he hadn't resisted arrest, and he was killed by the conditions that he was suffering. It is just like Eric Garner. The guy was morbidly obese. I forget all the internal diabetes, all the things that go with that make you vulnerable. The guy's 300 pounds and 6 feet tall. Chervin was 6 foot something, and 250 pounds. So you have to subdue them. What people forget, how do you bring down somebody like that? Well, they had him handcuffed. So that makes this much more problematic case. But the fact of the matter is, if you know you've had COVID, if you know you're high on fentanyl, if you know you have heart failure, you don't give the police a hard time when they arrest you. It's suicidal.
Yeah, every
a normal person, not a career criminal like Floyd, but a normal person obeys the guy. But Chris Rock has this very funny video that's viral now called "How Not to Get an Ass Whooping," and the first principle is obey the law. How hard is that?
Obey the law, and if you don't, obey the police that you're interacting with. Yes. I mean, every single one of these instances.
Practically every one of the martyrs, their name. Even Breonna Taylor, who was innocent, but she had the bad, poor judgment, say, to have a boyfriend who was a major drug dealer. And the police wanted to search her house because they thought this drug dealer was putting drugs in her, storing drugs in her house. And when they broke in, because they had a no-knock warrant, her current boyfriend opened fire on them and wounded a cop. So, of course, they shot back. That's why she's dead. Not because of racism, systemic or otherwise. You could just go down the whole list.
Let me tick off
It's Rayshard Brooks, scumbag in Atlanta, who was serving a 7-year sentence for cruelty to his own children. You don't get 7 years for a homicide in a lot of places in America anymore. And that's why he resisted arrest. He didn't want to go back. And he fired a weapon at a cop. My estimate was he was 10 feet away. Could have killed him. He's dead. That's what happens when you do that. And the cop is charged with murder. That's not what happens in a decent society.
Black Lives Matter, Antifa, Occupy Wall Street. Do you see those three groups as all essentially the same?
Yes. Antifa is an older group, and they're marked. They're an army, is what they are. They all have the same philosophy. To go back to my thought crimes, if you disagree with them, I've read actually the Antifa manual, which you can get for 99 cents on Amazon, and it's a boring academic argument. But the argument is this: if you disagree with us, you are either a white supremacist or a fascist, and you need to be suppressed because the government can't be trusted to suppress you. And that means by any means necessary, including killing you if necessary. That's Antifa's philosophy, its modus vivendi. If you look at the best-selling book in America on race, which is this jerk Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, it's the same thing. According to Kendi, there's only racists and anti-racists. You can't be a non-racist. You can't be a non-racist and oppose racism because you're a non-racist. You have to be an anti-racist. And what's an anti-racist? Somebody who agrees with him on policy, any policy. So, of course, you're going to be called a racist if you disagree with them. And they don't have the brains or the time to listen to the argument. That's why our universities are one-party states. The worst thing that's happened in the last 50 years has been the destruction of our school systems. I wrote 5 books about it, but nobody paid that much. One of them sold very well, but it didn't have any influence on reforming these colleges. So, now not only are conservatives as rare as unicorns on the faculties, most college students will go through 4 years of college without ever encountering an adult conservative in the flesh. But I don't even go to, I for 20 years, I had to take a bodyguard to go to a college campus. And I don't go anymore because the last I went to Dartmouth and they, the professors called for boycotting me. They used the Southern Poverty Law Center's smear site, which just makes unfounded accusations as anti-Muslim, anti-Black, whatever else they wanted to call me. I responded to all of it for the guy who interviewed me for the Dartmouth paper. He ignored everything I said and just reprinted the slanders. And then when I spoke, these leftists there, they got it, they turned on opened their computers and played porn films very loudly. 2 lesbians got up on chairs and started tongue kissing each other as though that was going to upset me. It just disrupted the proceedings. They unfurled banners, they made speeches. The vice president in charge of student affairs was there and did absolutely nothing to ensure that there's an academic environment. He thought it was funny. So I said, and I had, they gave Linda Sarsour, this Jew-hating racist communist, $10,000 6 months earlier. I had to pay my own way. I got no honorarium. I had to bring my own security. And what I got was just, a miserable afternoon.
And am I right that Visa and MasterCard stopped processing donations to your organization?
Yeah, and they all do it. Look, it's much worse. I've got another book coming out, which I may have published this, but I gave a speech. A group called the Convention of the States. They want to convene the states, 2/3 of the states, and amend the Constitution, which could be a dangerous idea in this atmosphere. But that's what they want to do. And they asked me to speak. And it was at an ALEC event. ALEC is anyway, it's an organization, bipartisan, which was a mistake on their part, of state legislators. I think there are 2,000 of them. There were about 1,200 at this event. For limited government, protection of property rights, and the First Amendment, stuff like that. So I gave a speech. And my speech was basically criticizing Republicans for not being more aggressive, for not taking Trump's example. But I made one sentence, gave us an example that Republicans control the legislatures and therefore the purse strings of the education systems in 33 states. And yet Black Lives Matter racists, or the racist Black Lives Matter organization is setting the curriculum, for example, in the school curriculum in Philadelphia, but it's all over the country. And CARE, which is a Hamas front, the terrorist front, is doing it in California. That was my sentence. There was a Democrat legislator named Chris Taylor from Wisconsin who was there and was outraged. And she got outraged twice because I was on a panel and I explained why I liked Trump. And I liked him from the moment he answered Megyn Kelly's non-question. It was an indictment, and it was the first question of the primary debates. She said, "You called women fat slobs and pigs." And he said, "Only Rosie O'Donnell." I thought that was brilliant. And I loved it because he didn't back off. He didn't shuffle. So she started, I didn't realize she was a Democrat, screaming at me, "You can't talk about women now, to women that way." I said, "Even if they are fat slobs and pigs." I mean, Rosie O'Donnell is she's a nasty person. And I said, "Why do you feel implicated by Rosie O'Donnell? Or why should women be implicated by one fat slob and pig?" Okay, so she left this convention and she wrote an article in, something like Democracy paper, but some left-wing paper, which said that this was a catastrophe. She'd been going to these events for 20 years and this is the worst thing that ever happened to me. And they organized a boycott. They got 79 leftist organizations to write joint letters to Verizon, for example, which is the oldest corporate sponsor of this group. They've been with them for 20 years. AT&T, Dow Chemical, every one of them, People for the American Way, Common Cause, who used to be liberal organizations. They said I was a racist and a hate monger for that sentence, which was as accurate as your statement. I think they could have lost, anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000, this organization, because of my appearance. They in the statements like Verizon put out, it just said because of, one keynote speaker, David Horowitz's hate speech, we're withdrawing our support. No argument about the hate speech. Anyway, I could go on and on.
Well, and I use as an example, how far away are we from Spectrum Cable or Dish Network or DirecTV no longer carrying Fox News?
One election.
Because it's hate speech.
One election. Twitter does this. All of my tweets, I not only do I tweet my opinions, but I'm a big fan of Mark Knopfler, who was the
Dire Straits?
Genius behind Dire Straits. Man is amazing. I've been going 3 months of posting Knopfler songs of the day, every one of them different. Every one. I mean, usually, a great group will have 10 songs or something. This guy's got hundreds. Anyway, all my Knopfler songs are shadow banned. They have an algorithm that shadow bans anything that I quote.
So you can't even post your favorite music anymore.
I hate to say this, but I have a family connection that I think is protecting me from being banned entirely. Because there's lots of people that are like me who have been kicked off permanently.
Let me ask you about Soros. Is he really behind much of this?
Why isn't Soros in jail? That's what I want to know. He's behind all these demonstrations, funds, Antifa, all these demonstrations, by the way, are illegal. They're breaking the law. You have to get a permit to block a street. You can't just block public streets. Sorry about that. What do I do? You can't do that. So here he's got all these insurrections going. He's behind it. He's funding the rioters. He hates America. He hates Israel. He's trying to overthrow governments all across Europe. I wrote a book with Richard Polk called The Shadow Party, which is about Soros. He owns the Democrat Party. He's the one who financed, in my book, Blitz, I described 5 days after the Trump election, there was a meeting at the Mandarin Oriental, a posh hotel in Washington. Pelosi was there, Elizabeth Warren, the Occupy Wall Street communists were there. You could, just go down the list. And they formed what they called a resistance to Trump. That's treason. We live in a democracy that's based on compromise, peaceful transitions of power. We have traditional honeymoons for the incoming presidents, like Obama, who was a far-out radical. It was a honeymoon for Obama that lasted a year or so, where he could get his team in place, and start his legislative program, and then you form a loyal opposition. Loyal meaning you're loyal to this country and its system. Nancy Pelosi and company organized an obstruction, a resistance to a duly elected president. They rejected the results of a fair election. That is treasonous. And then they, instituted this coup. We know their intentions were treasonous because Obama and Biden presided over this coup d'etat organized by suborning the intelligence agencies to frame Trump as colluding with Russia, something that they knew we had no evidence for. So I don't know how I got off on this. But
well, we're talking about Soros, so let me tell you something that I noticed.
Yeah, Soros is behind it.
What's fascinating, David, sorry, I was just want to tell you that when you Google Soros and Antifa, what you get is all kinds of debunking of this alleged conspiracy theory that he's associated with them.
Grab that. Look, I just wrote this book, Blitz, and I've got another one. So I use the internet for research all the time. It's true of every issue that's important. You'll have pages of left-wing claptrap debunking anything Republicans or conservatives say. And they still then, by the third page, you can find an article which provides the facts that refute all these other things.
Well, the one interesting one to keep it...
That's so easy to disappear. And I'll tell you the problem. Mark Zuckerberg tried to resist this at Facebook. But here's what happened. The Democrats, behind closed doors, forced him to agree to censor political speech on Facebook. So he had to hire people to do that. 30,000 people out of college, all of them brainwashed as leftists. And he can't face down his company. Even though he's the boss, what's he going to do? Fire 30,000 people, and then where's he going to get? And these are the kind of people who say, if you wear a MAGA hat, this woman was I blocked her because she was wearing a MAGA hat that shows she's biased or racist or whatever. So like I say, once you have this concept of hate speech, or this concept that this stupid book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, has, which is anybody who disagrees with your views of affirmative action, for example, is a racist. It's basically over.
So how do you get the message across, the things that you're talking about? I mean, when I'll write articles for Fox News, but I know I'm just preaching to the choir. So to some extent, I just kind of feel like I'm wasting my time. How can we...
Fox News is half gone already anyway. I hate to say it. First of all, I haven't had 2 seconds on Fox. I have the 10th best-selling book in the country. I haven't had 2 seconds on Fox. I have hosted and promoted the books of over a half a dozen Fox stars. Now, one of them has responded to my publicist and got me on either the TV or they have radio shows as well.
Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I don't know. I got to get people to tell me. I've tried.
Yeah. Well, I've questioned sometimes, they removed that anchor from Fox Business who talked about the coronavirus and it potentially being a hoax. The next thing you know, was it Regan? Yeah, she was removed very quickly for.
Yeah, worse than that, this Alicia Acuna, I believe it was her, just as a part of a report when John Lewis died, quoted a quote from about John Lewis from the Southern Poverty Law Center, the biggest hate machine, smear machine in the country, and the most corrupt. I mean, we're talking about a $600 million operation, and described the Southern Poverty Law Center, which even leftist magazines like Politico say, they just exploiting the race issue to attack legitimate conservatives. She referred to it as a civil rights organization.
Well, in wrapping up, how does this all end in your estimation?
Well, I'm committed myself to Trump is going to win in November. So it'll go on. There'll be another a war for another 4 years at least. I think it would take the country 50 years or more to get out of the mess we've dug for ourselves.
Thank you again so much to David Horowitz for coming on our show. You can check out his book, Blitz, How Trump Will Smash the Left and Win. It's available on Amazon and anywhere else that you buy books. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.